Tonight's talk, Planning and Conduct of Amphibious Operations from Paul Knight. Paul holds a PhD in history, is a fellow of the Royal Historical Society and author of several military history books. He has a long-term interest in the First World War in the Middle East and would like to get out to Gallipoli more often than time and money permits. Thanks for joining us, Paul. If you'd like to start your talk.
Yeah, what I'm going to talk about this evening is quite a lot of this is doctrine. So it's quite a few of these slides are going to be quite word heavy, but of all the times I've been out to Gallipoli, no one's ever discussed or there's been no presentations or talks on how you actually get onto the beaches. We tend to start with um, Lancashire Landing or the River Clyde, and actually pretty much when those boats touch the gravel and people jump out and get their feet wet. I wanted to look at the bit beforehand. How do you do a bit of planning? How do you work out? How does it all happen in the first place? And this ties in with my work because I'm the SO2 historical analysis at the Land Warfare Centre. So I'm a serving major and I work in historical doctrine and how did we do things in the past? So to try and help us get through similar circumstances in the future. How did they actually get the troops to the beaches? So, it's the getting ashore piece I'm looking at, not really the uh, you know inland and the 12 VCs before breakfast and all of that, and 6 VCs before breakfast and all that sort of stuff. Not going to touch that sort of stuff. It's getting people ashore that I'm interested in. So quite a big quote here, but I've always with the big quotes I try and highlight the key bits that we want in red. This is from Eric Erickson's book Gallipoli Command Under Fire. Um, there is formal doctrinal concepts from amphibious warfare available, which we will look into a bit more detail. Um, but I think Eric is right that there's no doctrine for how to fight your way ashore. A lot of it is how to get onto dry land, because then theoretically, I think your normal tactics and doctrine from field service regulations will kick in. Um, I mean, Ericsson makes the point. Hamilton's got weeks in which to plan this operation.
As a burnt pancake.
There's not a lot of time really for him to come up with anything too imaginative or innovative. But he does seem to go through the process correctly. That's not the same as things working. I think he goes through the process correctly. He understands the importance of establishing a covering position or defensive perimeter quickly on the beaches to allow unloading to take place, and then you can then do the breakout, and defeat the Turks and onto Gallipoli, off Gallipoli onto Istanbul, onto Constantinople. He also talks about feints and diversions, trying to get the enemy to think that you're going to land elsewhere, and we know that there's a feint way up north beyond Anzac Cove, and we know there's a French landing as well. So this is all trying to fix the Turks' troops and their attention off the main landing beaches. And to an extent, I think those worked, getting the Turks to be looking elsewhere. So this is Ericsson's opinion of the part of the whole campaign that we're talking about. I'm going to jump forward quite a bit. Everybody's familiar with D-Day. Make no apologies for it. It's 29 years later. You're 4 years into the war after Dunkirk. The main effort, I think, of the British and the Americans is landing in Northwest Europe and getting to Berlin. Much more industrial might is able to be dedicated to the D-Day landings. It still goes through pretty much the same process. You have the covering force getting ashore. to uh, to secure the landings for the build-up, which will take weeks and weeks to take place. And if you study the Gallipoli landings, sorry, if you study the D-Day landings, you know the impact of the storm that comes along a few days later, which destroys one of the Mulberry harbours. That delays the build-up. That gives the Germans opportunity to reorganize their position, and that creates more problems later on. This sounds a bit like Gallipoli, I think. Also takes best part of 3 months to break out of Normandy, and the Falaise Gap and the big drive up to the Dutch-Belgian border. So, there are some parallels with what we'll see at what we see at Gallipoli. Likewise, the defense of Normandy was not the Germans' main effort in 1944. I think that's fighting the Russians. In 1915, Gallipoli is the Turkish main effort, and the British, and to a lesser extent the Americans, have had quite a bit of practice before D-Day. In the early 1940s, you've got things like Madagascar, you've got the torch landings in North Africa, and then into Sicily, and then into Italy proper. So there's an opportunity to get things right and develop the tactics and the equipment and so on. That is just not available in 1915. But yet, 29 years later, I think there's a direct correlation between what we'll study at April 1915 at Gallipoli and what happens in June 1944 at Dunkirk. There are two documents I'm going to really look at here. 1904, there's before the First World War, there are army manoeuvres taking place most years. And in 1904, it was actually an amphibious operation. And then 9 years later, there is doctrine, the Manual of Combined Naval and Military Operations, 1913. This is, as far as I'm aware, the only piece of doctrine in the world on how to do amphibious operations. And given in mind the date, there's been no opportunity to practice it really before Gallipoli takes place. I'll go into a little bit more detail on why 1904 is an amphibious landing. But what happens a couple of years later is that our alliance with the French means that any overseas expeditions we're going to take place in will be in support of a friendly power. Therefore, there will be ports we can use. Therefore, we don't really need to bother about amphibious operations. So, situation changes and the emphasis goes off amphibious operations for other types of operations, cooperation with the French. These are the two books themselves. I copied them and accessed them at the National Archives. So if anyone wants to go and read them in their entirety, that's where there are original copies. The three modern books I've actually used are these three up here. So Simon Batten's Futile Exercise is about this pre-war training for the outbreak of the First World War. And he's got a chapter, his chapter 2 is Invading Essex 1904. It's about this amphibious operation. Edward Ericsson, my apologies, I called him Eric before. Edward Ericsson's Gallipoli Command Under Fire, which I think is a great book about high level leadership on both sides during the Gallipoli campaign and how the planning takes place. Actually chatting with Warren before about the Inside GHQ book that you're reading at the moment. I think there might be some interesting. I have to read those side by side again. And Hugh Dolan's 36 Days. He's looking at the intelligence preparation before the Anzac Bay landings. I'm not aware that there's an equivalent study into the intelligence assessment before the Gallipoli landings down at Hellas. Maybe that's a book that needs to be read. But the sort of thing that he's discussing and looking at and how the intelligence was gathered and analysed does tie in quite closely with the policy that was available at the time. So I'm going to start with this report on the Army Manoeuvre in 1904, and this is um, a key line which when I read it and first found it in the futile exercise chapter, but then reread it again in the report on army manoeuvres. It is very questionable whether, in these of improved firearms, a descent on a coastline can be carried out in the teeth of a resolute opposition. So this really is saying that there's been landings in the past, but they've had muskets and not very accurate weapons and smoothbore cannons and things like that. But now we are talking about bolt action rifles, rapid rate of fire, range up to about 1,000 yards, machine guns, quick firing artillery. Getting ashore under those circumstances is going to be extremely difficult, if at all. And this was recognised 11 years before the event. So the fact that they're having to go at Gallipoli at all, knowing that it's going to be defended, I think that's quite a tall undertaking. Let's not beat around the bush. These guys know that this is going to be a difficult task to achieve. Two of the characters involved in the 1904 manoeuvres who turn up later on in Gallipoli, one of which is our friend Frederick Stopford, in charge of the Suvla Bay landing. He's one of the directing staff in 1904, so he's one of the umpires. And he's also director of military training, so this is his exercise. So he really should be very well aware of the difficulties being encountered in trying to do an amphibious landing. And with that in mind, I'd have thought he'd have done better in 1915, but there you go. And again, reading the chapter in futile exercise, reading away, quite enjoying this, and suddenly you come up with a name like that, you have to do a double take and Google that this is the bloke that you think it is from Gallipoli story, reappearing or appearing in a previous career. The other person who turns up is Albert Darman, who's the French attaché, and he then goes to observe the 1904 exercise. So again, we got a couple of people from 1915 who have at least observed the exercises, and you would have hoped would have had the opportunity to think about the problems before you try and do the landing at Gallipoli. So 1904 exercise. This is in the backdrop of an invasion fear against the British mainland from let's be honest, from the Germans. But at the political level, this is the official line, that we don't want to practice landing an army on a foreign coast, but we do want to see whether a foreign army can land on our coast. So the exercise itself is actually seeing whether it's practicable to conduct a landing, and can we then defend ourselves effectively against it. That's the official line. But I'm sure if you're the exercising troops and you're participating in the landing, you want to make that work and see if it's really, really, really effective. So there's a slight difference between 1904 and 1915, but you get the idea that the background to all this is to see whether the UK can be invaded. So the 1904 manoeuvres, landings will take place around Clacton, where there is not a port. And again, anyone who's studied or read into 1944 and D-Day and things like that, you'll be aware of the importance of the Dieppe landing to try and capture a port, and then it's decided that capturing a port is not practicable, so you have to do the Mulberry Harbours instead. This is the sort of thing that's being looked at in 1904. So the main landing is going to be around Clacton, that major military target. This is an area in which there have been no military exercises before. Most of the exercises, sorry, because of the legislation at the time, you can only use one area every 5 years, and then they've got to be rotated around the country, so you're not putting too much pressure on one particular part of the country. And most of the exercises will take place in Salisbury Plain anyway. The background to the landings is that there's been a naval battle at sea. The invading force now has command of the sea, which means that they can land their troops unopposed from naval interference, at least for a couple of days until the defending navy is able to get itself together and bring up more ships. So yeah, we're assuming a naval victory by the invaders. That side of the operation we don't need to worry about anymore. They're going to land 12,000 men, 42 guns, and 2,700 horses. This is Blue Force, and it's two divisions. They're actually landing two locations 7 miles apart from each other. One at Clacton, and the second division landing at name's escaping me at the moment, but just yeah, a couple of miles up the coast anyway. So that they are landing two divisions, which again is pretty much what you're going to do on at the at Gallipoli, two divisions, but without the horses. So it's a similar sort of size. And actually, when you think about it, at D-Day, British Army will land on amphibious operations another two divisions. So this is pushing the technology and the limits. I would say from 1904. Red Force, who are the defenders, is made up of 10th Division, which is about half of the size of Blue Force. And their task is to conduct a delaying operation until until reinforcements can come. If you're defending the coast, you don't know where you're going to be landed, so you want to have a thin screen along the coastline, and then a larger force held centrally, who can then be deployed, probably by train, to drive the invaders back into the sea. So that's the outline of what the 1904 operation is going to contain. And look on the right hand side, Erskine Childers, Riddle in the Sands, which if anyone's read that one, and then you've got similar novels like The 39 Steps from 1915. It is his background to is England, or the English coastline in particular, safe from invasion from Germany, and this is sort of the background to the these invasion scares of the late Victorian into the Edwardian period. So this is a photograph of Clacton at the time, with the landings taking place. You can see it's not exactly D-Day, and it's not exactly Y Beach or V Beach or Anzac Cove. There's definitely not a lot of opposition on the beaches for the troops to be unlanded in this leisurely format. And here's a lot of Scottish soldiers enjoying a day out at Clacton Sands, waiting to be given instructions to move inland. Again, it's not D-Day and it's not Gallipoli. But bearing in mind, this is the first time that this has been trialed. This is your very first attempt at a modern amphibious landing. So let's see how it goes. So actually it happens at the time, 2 o'clock in the morning, 7th of September 1904. The invasion fleet arrives off the Essex coast. Yeah, and 0800 they start landing. 1st Division at Clacton and 2nd Division at Holland Gap, which is just up the coast, about 7 miles away. The landing took place all day, or it took all day to conduct the landing, during which time the tide goes out. Not a problem you have at Gallipoli, but you end up having to disembark 100 yards further out to sea. Landing continues into the evening and has to be conducted under the searchlights from the warships. Not very tactical, but I suppose that this is the way you've got to do it. And throughout the day, I mean, it is September in the English Channel, the weather just turned for the worse, which slows down the disembarkation. And the disembarkation continues into D+1 into the second day. So it's quite a slow and protracted activity. While this is going on, actually, there are some military exercises going on inland. Um, One of the observations is that the countryside around Clacton, a lot more closed in than they're used to exercising around Salisbury Plain. Lots of hedges, lots of small fields, and some of the invading forces are able to make use of this and get the advantage over the defenders who can't see as much as they would normally expect to see. So that's a 1904 exercise. Like I say, it's the only one the British Army conducts. It's not really at a scale or pace. So the scale, the number of troops landing, I think is at the right level considering with what we've seen in subsequent landings. But the whole the speed of it, the way in which it's conducted, is not really tactically viable. And then coming out of this, we've got this second document, which is Combined Naval and Military Operations 1913, which is, if you want to read it, it's 72 pages, including appendices. It's not a particularly big read, but it is, as far as I'm aware, the only doctrine for conducting an amphibious operation for any army in the world at the outbreak of the First World War. So this is what you've got. The first paragraph here is the one that we've seen already, which I think has to be, well, it's repeated. I've repeated it. It's not in the 1913 doctrine, but it's really, I've just repeated it. Any attempt at a defended beach with modern weaponry is going to be extremely difficult to undertake. Paragraph 3 of the 1913 document sort of goes on a similar lines. The manual is dealing with overseas operations where you've got to land on an open beach in circumstances where sea communications and disembarkation are liable to interference by the enemy's naval or military forces. Unfortunately, 1915, we don't really have to worry about the Turkish Navy. We do have to worry about their military forces. And then the second part of paragraph 3 is in bold. And this is really in keeping with most British doctrine at the time, which is deliberately vague, because we could theoretically be landing anywhere and operating anywhere in the world, unlike the French and Germans at the time, who we know are pretty much fighting or planning to fight against one another. You've got your plan, you know exactly what you're going to do. British pre-First World War doctrine can be quite vague because you could be operating anywhere. But it does emphasize the importance of the naval and military commanders working together to overcome any problems which they come up against. And Field Service Regulations 1909, which is your army manual for fighting once you've got ashore, that dedicates 4 pages to travel at sea. But that is mostly looking at going from one friendly port to another friendly port. So from Southampton to Calais, for example, how is that conducted? Field Service Regulations 1909 will kick in once the 1913 doctrine finishes, i.e., when the troops get ashore and you've started pushing inland a bit. So the sort of things that's being covered, this is paragraph 14, which is looking at in the left-hand paragraph, left-hand column, is looking at well, sorry, it's looking at different things that the different sorry, getting me so confused here. Paragraph 14 is looking at the suitability of beaches for landings. And again, you think forward at Dieppe, and then before D-Day, when they are inspecting the beaches, trying to work out the suitability of beaches for getting on and through and off. So the Navy is interested in that central paragraph, suitability of the beaches for actually the landing, for the boats getting ashore. What you don't really want is a sandbar 100 meters out that the boats are going to ground on, and then your boats are going to become sitting ducks. And the possibility of covering fire from the warships, and those are armed boats. Now, in terms of armed boats, I mean, you've got the River Clyde, which is trying to use this idea of having machine guns on ships right up close, as close as you can get inshore, to give covering fire to support the troops getting ashore. But I mean, we can compare this with the Australians who decide to go for a silent assault and using surprise, whereas the British at Hellas decide to go for a noisy approach and use firepower to fire the troops ashore. The right-hand column is actually what the army should be thinking about. How do you get off the beaches? Where can you establish your covering force? That is the troops who are going to defend the beaches. Roads leading to your objective, and water supply. And water being one thing which is missing from Gallipoli, I think, we'd all agree. But very often you have to fight where you're told to fight, not really the ideal circumstances of where you want to fight. Paragraph 17 is actually talking about seizing the beach. And again, that middle column is for the Navy to think about it, and the right-hand column is for the Army to think about it. So this really is a piece of doctrine where you should be reading it, the naval and military personnel side by side going through these problems together. So, an anchorage for the ships. Can the ships provide covering fire support? How do you get the troops ashore? How do you get them off the beaches if you need to? And again, for the Army, what is the nature of the opposition that you're going to face? And again, this is one of the things which is Hugh Dolan's book, 36 Weeks. So 36 Days is really looking at identifying where the Turkish positions are. What is their likely reaction? How long have you got to get off the beaches and inland and establish yourself in a good defensive position? Sequence of disembarking your covering force and then the main body and getting everybody ashore. Beach parties, those who are going to control what happens on the beach, and then the main body of troops, which ideally should be able to land in a safer environment than what the covering force had to go ashore on. And finally, re-embarkation should things go wrong. Paragraph 26 is actually, again, it's looking at the beaches. And, again, I'll draw parallels with Dieppe and D-Day, looking at the nature of the beach, looking at where the enemy is, the slope of the beach. If you've got to get off the beach with wagons and guns and things like that, you want a nice gentle beach that of the right sort of texture. Is it sand? Is it pebbles? Is it going to be great big slabs of rock that are going to be difficult going for wheeled vehicles like the artillery pieces? How much space have you got on the beach? Can you maneuver on the beach? How deep is the beach? How wide is it? What other facilities are available? Are there pontoons and are there harbours and quays and things like that available? Can you build things on the beach? And obviously this becomes a big thing at Gallipoli in the ensuing months, where we build jetties and harbours to assist with the unloading. Is there anything locally available that you can make use of, particularly boats you can siege, and intercommunication? And I think this is talking from the beach back to the ships and vice versa. But the intercommunication at Gallipoli, particularly at Hellas, when you've got all the different landing beaches going on, and the difficulty they have of talking between the beaches. That becomes a real thing. Might have missed an opportunity here to remind people about the ability to communicate between the beaches. Talking about reconnaissance, so this is immediately off the beach. So what is that hinterland? Once you've got troops ashore, is the beach appropriate really to go inland and and get inshore? What is the topography? Can you get inland? Supplies. Are there any supplies going to be available locally that you can make use of? Ditto transport. Are there any railways? In the First World War, everything is based on railways. But again, we're operating against the Ottoman Empire, where railways are not that prevalent. Where's the water? Well, there isn't a lot. And accommodation, where are we going to put the troops up? Where are we going to accommodate the troops? Are there good towns that we can use to get the troops out of inclement weather? Well, we know at Gallipoli there isn't, but unfortunately, you have to fight where you are directed to fight. And again, it's interesting with these headings when you read Hugh Dolan's book, when they're looking about getting it inland, and the Gallipoli, so the Anzac beach is a lot steeper, a lot more difficult to get in. You've got to get off that really high ground and get inland if you're going to have any chance of breaking out. These headlines, I think, make interesting reading when you're looking at Anzac compared with Hellas, and maybe we'll see the beaches in a slightly different light. These sort of 6 paragraphs, these are really sort of 6, 7 paragraphs here, are actually quite the brief, but it's all to do with the military orders. How the army is going to fight, how it's going to give the orders to its soldiers to get ashore. Field Service Regulations Part 1, that's 1909. That's really to do with how you get how you conduct the seaborne journey. There's about 4 pages on that, so not a lot, but it's like duties on board ship and who's in charge and who's responsible for what. Orders given to your troops in paragraph 37 about the enemy, the objectives, who is the covering force, how are you going to disembark. Instructions to the covering force commander. This seems to be the bit that I think is missing actually at Gallipoli. We're not giving enough direction to the different beach commanders, if you want to describe it that way. The 5 or so beaches at Hellas plus up at Anzac. If the commanders had a better understanding of what was going on the other beaches, they could probably use their initiative and intelligence to see the situation on the ground and then make an informed decision and change the circumstances, rather than just literally following the instructions and not really responding to not being able to contribute to help beaches which are in difficulty. How are you going to disembark the larger part of the army? How are you going to get the stores ashore to sustain the battle? And the shipboard routine, who's in charge? How's that going to run? So there's actually quite a lot going on in the background here, which again, like I said, tends to be missed from the all the times I've been to Gallipoli. This sort of stuff is it's not even brushed over. I think it's usually just ignored. There's a whole paragraph on the covering force. Actually, this will go on for quite a bit, so I apologize for lots of text. This is giving advice on how the covering force is to get ashore to seize the landing beaches. And again, the first piece I've highlighted, by a sea landing at night, which is that's what the Anzacs will do. They'll try and go for a quiet dawn, silent landing to surprise the enemy, whereas Hellas goes for a daylight landing, which is noisy with lots of support. mentions a possibility of drawing the enemy defenders elsewhere by means of a feint. Um, Again, yes, you've got the demonstration further up the coast, and you've got the French landings to fix as many of the Turkish defenders well away from the actual landing beaches as possible until, at least until people are ashore and in detail. And finally, making dispositions for the protection of the beach and the anchorage. So, yeah, the landing beach and the ships at anchor. How far inland do you have to get to protect the ships? Is it the range of a rifle, the range of a machine gun, or is it the range of the artillery? And that suggests you've got to get off the beaches quite quickly and inland to drive off any Turkish artillery that's in the area. And again, this is more guidance of what the strength and composition of the covering force will be, and it's quite vague because it says this will depend on the information available of the strength and the armaments of the troops who may oppose a landing. Now, again, going back to Hugh Dolan's book, I think there's a good understanding of what the enemy positions are at Anzac. I said I've not really seen a study into the same intelligence picture for Hellas, so that'd be interesting. Might be a book for somebody to write in the future. Got to take into consideration enemy with mobile artillery, and is it possible to land in darkness at a time when the artillery can't respond, and then get to drive the enemy artillery away? This is recommending 5 miles inland, which is well, it is quite a lot further than we managed to achieve on the first day at the first day of the Gallipoli landings. But this distance of 5 miles inland, let's go and plot that on a map and see what needs to be secured in order to protect the beaches. They're also talking about widely separated beaches, and that's just something you see down at Hellas. Rapidity of landing is of great importance. How many landing vessels can you get ashore in one go? How much of this can you achieve in the dark? Speed is of the essence. And I think, well, different people listening here will be aware, or will have different expertise of the different landing beaches. You can discuss whether you think rapidity of landing happened. I think the landings themselves were quite rapid, but it's the push inland that really failed. And this is further on. Ideally, the whole covering force should be landing in one trip, and they're talking about infantry with machine guns and cyclists, so to get that mobility, so that almost straight away you can be able to drive inland and get into the enemy's rear area and disrupt their ability to fire upon the beaches. If you've got cyclists, you can get round the rear. Ideally, what you'd want to do is try and get to the enemy's command and control areas, their headquarters, and disrupt them. It goes on to say that the responsibility for modifying the naval arrangements lands with the naval commander. Makes sense. But if the landing is opposed, the Navy and the Army must work together. The military commander's wishes will have paramount importance. But we talk about cooperation between the Army and the Navy to make this work. This is not services operating independently. And I think from my readings of Gallipoli, I think that cooperation was there for the landings. Certainly a massive effort was made by the Navy to get the infantry ashore safely and efficiently. Okay, it didn't happen ideally as we would have liked on the day, but that's almost separate to the intent. And again, here's your Beachmaster. This is obviously from the Longest Day film, but getting all that equipment, um, all those personnel off the beaches quickly and inland, because otherwise you're going to get congestion on the beaches. The enemy knows where the beaches are. If the enemy's got artillery within range, they'll bring down fire onto the beaches, causing chaos. So getting troops and equipment and everything off the beaches is the responsibility of the Beachmasters in 1915, same as at D-Day. This is where the idea comes from, but you really want to get the people off the beach and away inland as quickly as possible. Intent and reality, not necessarily the same thing. Appendix 1 actually gives a couple of definitions, which well, quite a few definitions, but there's two which I'll put up here because, again, it's this idea of, which I hope I've touched upon, of this being the first attempt at amphibious doctrine, but actually has repercussions, 29 years later. Okay, a beach may be subdivided into two or more sections and two or more landing places according to the respective extent. Okay, so there's multiple landing beaches at Gallipoli, but each beach has only got one name. Again, jump forward to D-Day, where there are 5 landing beaches, but each of those beaches is subdivided into are then subdivided down into beaches for different units to land on. So actually, this is getting this idea of having a large beach area, which may require separate subdivisions for command and control. And this definition of the covering position, which I think is vital for their understanding of how this operation is going to take place. So the position to be occupied by an advanced detachment of troops, so the covering force, at such a distance from the selected landing that neither anchorage nor beach nor forming up place are exposed to enemies, and to shell fire from the enemy's land forces. In other words, this covering force, which is your initial landing troops, has got to get far enough inland to protect the beaches and the ships from artillery fire. Where is that going to be? I think from the Hellas landing, I think Achibaba is probably going to be the place you've got to occupy to deny views from the Turkish artillery observer onto the beach landing areas and the anchorages, even if you haven't overrun all the Turkish artillery positions. And for Anzac, I think similarly, you've got to get up and over those crests and onto the big, the flat land beyond the the gullies that we've all walked over, in order to prevent the Turkish artillery observers having sight of the Anzac beaches. So it's not necessarily the distance that the guns can fire, although you can fire off maps, but it's denying the Turkish artillery observers sight of the landing beaches. And this is something that they've understood in 1913, the importance of this. Whether or not it happens is a separate question. But I think the people who are generating this doctrine in 1913 have an understanding of the problems which need to be addressed, as I say. So all in all, although it's only 72 pages and it doesn't tell you anything really at all about how to fight, how to get ashore, how to defeat the enemy, it is primarily focusing on getting the troops ashore, and then once you are ashore, off that immediate beach area, once the beaches are secured by these covering positions, is then the responsibility of Field Service Regulation 1909, which is your standard book, and similar doctrine on how to fight the land war, how to fight the battle. That should then kick in and see the army to victory and team medals in Istanbul, and all the things that unfortunately didn't happen. But I think it's worth noting the difference between the intent and the planners and this intellectual, this conceptual understanding of how to do a amphibious operation with what actually happens. It doesn't work. It's almost a separate issue as far as I'm concerned from the planning and the intent. But I think also this 1913 doctrine, there's enough good stuff that you can take forward into the Second World War. They've and apply then this idea of securing the beaches, ideally, silently at night time, this stealth, this getting the enemy guns so you can unload on the beaches as safely and with limited interruptions possible. These are very these are ideas which are brand new in 1913, used for the first time in 1915, but equally applicable in 1944. So, those staff officers at the War Office who write all these publications, I think are probably due a bit more credit than very often the red tabs receive. Speaking as a red tab myself. Thank you very much.